Have you ever thought about boundaries? I don't mean a fence or a line on a map. I'm talking about the invisible lines we live by every single day. The ones that tell us what's right, what's wrong, what's safe, and what's dangerous. Where do these rules come from? To find the answer, we have to travel way back in time, long before walls, borders, or even written language existed. Back then, the world was wide open. There were no kings, no police, no laws written in stone, and yet people still lived within limits. But these limits weren't physical, they were psychological. They were built, piece by piece, inside the human mind. Think about it. Early humans didn't just wake up one morning and decide, hey, let's create some boundaries. It was a much slower, more natural process, driven by the most basic instinct of all. Survival. Imagine you're a part of a small, ancient tribe. Every day is a challenge. You need to find food, avoid predators, and stay warm. Certain actions lead to good outcomes. For example, sticking with your group means you're safer from a saber-toothed cat. Following the experienced hunter leads you to a successful hunt. These actions feel good. They feel safe, so you repeat them. Over and over repetition is a powerful teacher. It carves pathways in our brain, turning simple actions into ingrained habits. For our ancestors, these habits became the first threads of their social fabric. On the flip side, some actions lead to bad outcomes. Wandering off alone at night. That's risky. Eating a strange, brightly colored berry without checking with the elders. That could be your last meal. These actions create a feeling of fear and anxiety. Fear is an incredibly effective boundary. It screams, don't cross this line. Over generations, these feelings of safety and fear hardened into unwritten rules. These rules weren't debated in a council. They were felt in the gut. They became the invisible fences that kept the tribe together and alive. This brings us to one of the most powerful forces in human history. Belonging. For early humans, being part of a group wasn't just a social preference. It was a matter of life and death. If you were exiled, your chances of survival dropped to almost zero. So, you learned to conform. You learned the group's customs, shared its beliefs, and respected its taboos. You did this not just to fit in, but to survive. The fear of being cast out was, in itself, a formidable boundary. It shaped behavior from the inside out. People didn't need guards to enforce the rules, because everyone became their own guard. The desire to belong made them police their own behavior. What's truly fascinating is how these ancient mental boundaries still influence us today. We might not worry about predators lurking in the dark, but we still feel the pull of our social groups. We still have a deep-seated need to belong, and we often adjust our behavior to fit in with our friends, family, or colleagues. That feeling of awkwardness when you break a social norm. That's a faint echo of the ancient fear of exile. That sense of comfort you feel when you're with people who get you, that's the modern version of the safety our ancestors found in their tribe. The lines that define our cultures, our manners, and even our personal sense of morality didn't just appear out of nowhere. They are the legacy of countless generations trying to navigate a dangerous world. They were shaped by survival, hardened by repetition, and reinforced by our fundamental need to connect with others. We may have built massive walls and drawn complex borders on our maps, but the most powerful boundaries are still the ones we carry inside our heads. They are the invisible architecture of human society, built long ago and still standing strong today. The first topic is survival before freedom. Imagine yourself tens of thousands of years ago, part of a small group of early humans, navigating a world filled with constant, immediate danger. What's the most important thing on your mind? Is it freedom? The right to do whatever you want? Whenever you want? Or is it something far more basic, far more urgent? It's survival. In that word, every single choice you make is a high-stakes gamble. Every rustle in the bushes could be a predator. Every unfamiliar plant could be poisoned. Every wrong turn could lead you into a territory from which you never return. In this environment, survival wasn't just a goal. It was the only goal. Let's really put ourselves in their shoes. Food is not a guarantee. You don't just go to a grocery store. You hunt, you gather, and you compete. Danger isn't an abstract concept. It's a living, breathing reality that stalks you day and night. And perhaps most terrifying of all, being alone, being isolated, is a death sentence. You need your group to watch your back, to share warmth, to find food, and to defend against whatever is lurking in the dark. Given these relentless pressures, how would you behave? Would you embrace pure, unrestricted freedom? Would you wander off on your own just to see what's over the next hill? Without a plan? Without telling anyone? Probably not. You'd learn very quickly that impulsive, unpredictable actions are incredibly dangerous. The person who insists on doing whatever they feel like is the person who gets eaten, who eats the poison berry. Unrestricted freedom is a liability. It's a risk your small, fragile group simply cannot afford. So, long before any kings, laws, or governments ever existed, humans began to limit themselves. They created their own boundaries, not from a desire to be controlled, but from a deep, instinctual need for safety. They started noticing patterns. If we walk this path, we find water and avoid the saber-toothed cats. If we walk that other path, someone doesn't come back. So, what do? You avoid that other path. You stick to what works. These weren't moral rules. They weren't about right and wrong in a philosophical sense. They were practical, life or death guidelines. Certain actions were repeated, not because they were virtuous, but because they worked. They reduced danger. You eat this plant? Not that one. You hunt at this time of day? Not that one. You build your shelter in this way? Not that way. These weren't commands handed down from on high. They were lessons written in blood and loss. The groups that learned these lessons, the ones that adopted these self-imposed limits, were the ones that survived. The ones that didn't vanished. Think about it this way. Freedom meant unpredictability. It meant chaos. And in a world where the margin for error is razor thin, chaos is deadly. On the other hand, predictability meant safety. If you know what to expect, you can prepare for it. If you follow the same proven routines, you increase your chances of seeing the next sunrise. Slowly but surely, over thousands of generations, safety became more valuable than absolute choice. The comfort of the familiar, the security of the known path, outweighed the thrill of the unknown. Our ancestors learned that staying within these established, tested limits was the key to survival. Stepping outside those limits wasn't seen as brave or adventurous. It was seen as reckless, foolish, and a threat to the entire group. This wasn't about a lack of imagination. It was about a very real and present fear of the consequences. The human brain is a powerful pattern recognition machine, and the pattern it learned above all others was this: boundaries equals survival. This is a critical point in our psychological. These early boundaries were entirely practical, not philosophical. But something fascinating happens in the human mind when you repeatedly associate two things. When you constantly link safety with restriction and danger with freedom, your brain starts to rewire itself. The boundaries stop feeling like a loss of freedom. They stop feeling like chains. Instead, they start feeling necessary. They start feeling like comfort. They feel like home. This is the birthplace of our acceptance of rules, of structure, of society itself. It didn't begin with a powerful leader imposing their will on others. It began from the ground up, with individuals and small groups recognizing that a little less freedom meant a lot more life. It's a trade-off we've been making ever since. The fear of uncertainty, the fear of the unknown, was the original architect of human society. It was the invisible hand that guided us toward creating rules and traditions. Survival was the ultimate trainer. It conditioned our ancestors to accept limits, to even seek them out, long before they had the language or the philosophy to debate the concept of freedom. The very idea of individual liberty as a primary value would have been completely alien. The group was everything, and the rules that held the group together were paramount. This ancient psychological programming is still with us today. We might talk a big game about freedom, but deep down, a part of our brain still craves the safety of boundaries, the comfort of the predictable. When you feel anxiety about stepping into a new, unknown situation, that's a distant echo of your ancestor hesitating at the edge of an unfamiliar forest. When you find comfort in routine and tradition, that's your brain tapping into that ancient wisdom that says, predictability equals safety. This isn't a weakness. It's a survival strategy that's been honed for millennia. So, the next time you think about the eternal struggle between freedom and security, remember where it all started. It didn't start in the halls of parliaments or in the pages of philosophy books. It started around a flickering fire, with a small band of humans learning the hard way that the first rule of existence is you and to be free, but simply to be, to survive. That fundamental lesson, learned in the cradle of our species, shaped everything that was to come. It taught us to accept limits before we ever truly understood the exhilarating and terrifying nature of freedom. This fundamental shift in our thinking, from pure impulse to calculated restraint, is arguably one of the most important developments in human history. It laid the groundwork for cooperation, for culture, for civilization. Without this initial willingness to trade some personal autonomy for collective security, we might never have made it out of the caves. The story of humanity isn't just a story of seeking freedom. It's also a story of learning the value of the walls we build around ourselves. The second topic is repetition creates limits. Have you ever wondered why we get stuck in the same old routines? Why changing our habits feels like fighting against ourselves? The answer goes way back to the very beginning of our story as humans. It all starts with a simple, powerful force: repetition. Imagine our earliest ancestors. Life was tough, a constant struggle for survival. When they found something that worked, a way to find food, a safe place to sleep, a method to avoid a predator, what did they do? They did it again, and again, and again. This wasn't about deep thinking or long-term planning. It was pure survival instinct. If it kept you alive today, you did it tomorrow. This repetition was a lifesaver. It turned risky, uncertain actions into reliable, predictable ones. The brain, being the incredibly efficient organ it is, loved this. Why? Because familiar actions require less energy. Think about it. When you first learn to drive, you're hyper-focused on every little thing: the steering wheel, the pedals, the mirrors. It's mentally exhausting. But after years of driving, you can do it almost without thinking. Your brain has created a shortcut, a habit. That's exactly what happened on a grand scale. Repetition created these the brain started to prefer these familiar paths, not just because they were easier, but because they felt safer. The unknown is risky, the familiar is safe. So, what started as a conscious choice for survival slowly transformed into an unconscious, automatic habit. And here's where the story takes a fascinating turn. These habits, born from the need to survive, began to build invisible walls around us. They quietly formed boundaries, drawing a line between what was normal and what was strange. We stopped exploring the full range of what was possible. Instead, we focused on what was usually done. Our world of infinite possibilities began to shrink to a comfortable, predictable bubble. Anything outside this bubble started to feel wrong, maybe even threatening. This wasn't a conscious decision. No one sat down and said, "Okay, from now on, we will only do these 10 things." It was much more subtle. These patterns were simply absorbed. Children learned by watching their elders. They saw what was done, and they copied it. No grand explanations were needed. The boundaries were passed down silently, from one generation to the next, through shared actions. What was repeated over and over became normal. And what became normal was no longer questioned. It just was. This is how cultures are formed, how traditions are born, and how societal norms take root. They are the echoes of ancient repetitions. Patterns that have been repeated for so long they've become part of our collective DNA. Think about your own life. How many of your daily actions are genuine choices? And how many are just habits you've fallen into? The way you get ready in the morning, the route you take to work, the food you eat, even the way you react to certain situations. Many of these are on autopilot. Over time, these boundaries hardened. They went from being about physical survival to being about psychological comfort. The reason for staying within the lines was no longer just about avoiding danger. It was about avoiding discomfort. The comfort of the known became the strongest cage of all. It feels good to be in our comfort zone. It's warm, it's cozy, it's safe. But the price of that comfort is limitation. And the craziest part, by the time we even start to notice these boundaries, we're already living deep inside them. It's like being born in a house and never knowing the world exists outside its walls. You don't question the walls because they've always been there. They are your reality. This isn't a story about being doomed or trapped. It's a story about awareness. Understanding how these limits were built is the first step to seeing them. And once you can see the walls, you can find the doors. You can start to question the unquestioned. Why do I do this? Is this serving me? Or is it just a comfortable old habit? The human brain is incredible. It created these patterns, and it can also create new ones. The same mechanism of repetition that built the walls can also be used to build new paths. It takes effort, of course. Stepping outside the familiar is uncomfortable. It feels risky. Your brain will scream at you to go back to the old, easy way. But every time you choose a new action, you're laying down a new neural pathway. At first, it's like trying to hack a path through a dense jungle with a small knife. It's slow, difficult work. But if you keep at it, that path gets wider. It becomes easier to walk. Eventually, it can become the new super. This is the power of conscious repetition. It's about taking the autopilot off and grabbing the steering wheel. It's about asking what could be done instead of just accepting what is usually done. It's about recognizing that the comfort zone is a beautiful place, but nothing ever grows there. So, the next time you feel that pull of the old routine, that resistance to trying something new, just remember where it comes from. It's not a personal failing. It's an ancient survival mechanism that might not be serving you anymore. See the boundary not as a hard limit, but as an old habit waiting to be updated. The power that created our limits is the very same power we can use to transcend them. It all begins and ends with what we choose to repeat. The third topic is belonging defines boundaries. Have you ever wondered why we care so much about what other people think? Why that feeling of not fitting in can be so powerful? The answer isn't just about modern social pressures. It goes way back to the very dawn of humanity. And it's a story about survival. Imagine the world tens of thousands of years ago. It's a harsh, unforgiving place. For early humans, strength wasn't just in numbers. It was everything. As small, nomadic bands started to form larger groups, a new kind of survival game began. It was no longer just about finding food or a safe cave to sleep in. A bigger, more powerful need was taking over. The need to belong. Being part of a group meant everything. It meant you had people to watch your back when a predator was near. It meant sharing the hunt, so no one starved. It meant warmth, protection, and a future for your children. Belonging was the ultimate life insurance policy. On the flip side, being outside the group was a death sentence. To be cast out, to be an outsider, meant facing all those dangers alone. You were exposed, vulnerable, and your chances of survival plummeted. So, very quickly, our ancestors learned a crucial lesson. Belonging is conditional. Think about it. No one handed out a rule book. There were no written laws. Instead, there were unspoken agreements, invisible lines drawn in the sand. Certain behaviors brought you closer to the center of the group. Sharing your food, helping to build a shelter, participating in rituals, these things strengthen your connection. They were rewarded with nods of approval, with inclusion, with safety. But other behaviors created distance, being selfish, refusing to cooperate, acting in ways that were strange or unpredictable. These things pushed you toward the edge. They made others uneasy. This wasn't about right or wrong in a moral sense. It was about group cohesion. Anything that threatened the stability of the group was a risk, and that risk had to be managed. So, these invisible boundaries began to form. People started to adjust their behavior, not because they were forced to, but because they instinctively understood the stakes. They learned to soften their differences, to conform to the group's norms. Unfamiliar actions were avoided, not because they were forbidden, but because they threatened the delicate web of connection that kept everyone alive. The fear of being excluded became a powerful, silent force shaping individual actions. It wasn't a conscious thought, like, if I do this, I'll be kicked out. It was deeper, more primal. It was an emotional response tied directly to survival. The anxiety you feel before speaking in front of a crowd, the hesitation before sharing a weird or unpopular opinion, that's an echo of this ancient fear. As societies evolved and grew more complex, something fundamental shifted. Belonging stopped being a practical choice and became an essential, psychological need. We didn't just live near other people anymore. We started to crave their approval. We needed to see ourselves reflected positively in their eyes. This is the moment when the boundaries moved from the outside to the inside. They were no longer just external rules of the group. They became internalized. They took up residence in our own minds, in our desire to be liked, to be accepted, to be valued. And this is how boundaries became emotional. The consequence of crossing them was no longer the threat of physical punishment or being banished to the wilderness. The punishment became something far more subtle, but in many ways, just as devastating. Isolation. Think of the sting of rejection, the cold shoulder from a friend, the feeling of being an outcast. That pain is real. It's a social pain, and our brains process it in a similar way to physical pain. Why? Because for our ancestors, that social pain was a warning signal. It meant our connection to the group was in jeopardy, and that was a direct threat to our survival. Isolation was a state early humans simply could not afford. So, this deep-seated need to avoid isolation drove us to internalize the group's expectations. We became our own guards, constantly monitoring our behavior to ensure we stayed within the acceptable limits. The desire for approval wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a highly adaptive survival strategy that had been honed over millennia. This ancient dynamic still plays out in our lives every single day. It's there in the workplace, when we hesitate to challenge a boss's bad idea. It's in our families, when we bite our tongue to avoid an argument during a holiday dinner. It's on social media, where we carefully curate our lives to present a version that will be liked and validated. Every time we conform, we are, in a small way, honoring that ancient contract. I will align with the group to ensure my emotional and social survival. We are navigating boundaries that are not written down anywhere but are felt deeply in our bones. Understanding this history doesn't mean we are slaves to it. In fact, it's the opposite. By recognizing where this powerful drive for belonging comes from, we can start to see it more clearly in our own lives. We can ask ourselves, am I conforming because I genuinely agree, or am I driven by a fear of isolation? Is this boundary protecting the group, or is it stifling healthy growth and individuality? Our modern world is vastly different from the one our ancestors inhabited. We are no longer in constant physical danger if we are cast out. We can find new groups, new communities, new tribes online and offline. Yet, that ancient programming remains. The fear of isolation is still a powerful motivator. But now, we have a choice. We have the capacity for self. We can learn to distinguish between healthy belonging, where we feel accepted for who we are, and unhealthy conformity, where we sacrifice our true selves to avoid disapproval. We can learn to be brave, to occasionally step over those invisible lines when our integrity demands it, and to trust that we can survive the temporary discomfort of standing apart. The story of belonging is a story of what it means to be human. It's a story of connection, of survival, and of the invisible forces that shape our lives. The next time you feel that pull to fit in, take a moment, acknowledge that ancient part of you that is just trying to stay safe, and then make a conscious choice about who you want to be, not just to survive, but to truly thrive. The fourth topic is fear as an invisible fence. Have you ever felt a hesitation, a strange pull holding you back from doing something, even when there's no obvious danger? It's like an invisible fence you can't see, but you can definitely feel. What if I told you that fence was built by one of our oldest and most powerful emotions? Fear. Now, when we think of fear, we often picture lions, steep cliffs, or public speaking. We think of fear as a response to a clear and present danger. But the kind of fear I'm talking about is much more subtle. It's the fear of the unknown, the fear of standing alone, the fear of making the wrong choice. This isn't the loud, screaming kind of fear. It's the quiet whisper of doubt in the back of your mind. Let's travel back in time, way back to our earliest ancestors. For them, survival was everything. Every decision carried weight. Venturing too far from the tribe could mean getting lost. Eating the wrong berry could be fatal. Challenging the group's norms could lead to exile, which was practically a death sentence. In this high-stakes world, fear wasn't just an emotion, it was a survival tool. It was a teacher. Imagine a young hunter venturing into a new, dense part of the forest. The light is dim, the sounds are strange, and every shadow looks like a predator. He feels a deep unease, a knot in his stomach. This feeling, this fear of the unknown, tells him to turn back, to stick to the familiar paths. He survives. His brain makes a powerful connection. New, unfamiliar territory equals discomfort and potential danger. The next time he even thinks about going that way, the hesitation will be automatic. No real threat is needed. The memory of that fear is enough. The fear itself has become the fence. This process wasn't just physical, it applied to social situations too. Imagine someone thinking about questioning a tribal elder's decision. Instantly, they'd feel a jolt of anxiety. What if the tribe turns against them? What if they're seen as a troublemaker? This social fear, the fear of rejection, keeps them in line. It reinforces the social structure and ensures the group stays cohesive. The most effective boundaries aren't walls or laws enforced from the outside. They are the ones we feel from the inside. Our own emotions become our guards. Over generations, this mechanism got refined. Fear taught us where not to go physically, socially, and mentally, and something fascinating happened along the way. This fear became familiar. The hesitation before trying something new, the anxiety about what others might think, the self-doubt before taking a risk. These feelings became a normal part of the human experience. We got used to them. We might not even label it as fear anymore. We call it being cautious, practical, or realistic. But here's the crucial twist. When does this ancient survival mechanism stop protecting us and start limiting us? When does the familiar fence that once ensured our survival start to box in our potential? A boundary that once protected our life can eventually start shaping our identity. Think about your own life. Is there a career path you dreamed of but never pursued because it felt too risky? A creative project you started but abandoned because you doubted your own ability? A conversation you needed to have but avoided for fear of the other person's reaction? These are your invisible fences. They are the modern-day echoes of that ancient fear. The danger is no longer a predator in the woods. It's the possibility of failure, judgment, or the problem is, Our brains can't always tell the difference between a life-threatening risk and a growth-promoting one. The emotional response to hesitation, the anxiety can feel exactly the same. So, that fear of the unknown that once kept our ancestors from wandering into a lion's den might now be the very thing keeping you from applying for your dream job. The fear of social rejection that once maintained tribal harmony might now be what stops you from sharing your unique ideas with the world. When these boundaries become ingrained, they form the blueprint of our comfort zone. And we all know what a comfort zone is. It's that cozy, familiar place where everything is predictable and safe. But it's also the place where growth comes to a screeching halt. The invisible fence of fear defines the edges of this zone. Stepping outside of it triggers the alarm system. So what happens when fear becomes your identity? You might start to think of yourself as just not the adventurous type, or someone who doesn't like change, or not a natural leader. You see, the boundary is no longer just something you feel. It's something you believe you are. The fence is no longer just around you. It's become a part of you. You stop seeing it as a choice to stay inside and start seeing it as your nature. This is where the real challenge lies. How do you dismantle a fence that has become part of your identity? The first step is awareness. It's about learning to recognize that feeling of hesitation, not as a final stop sign, but as a signal that you are at the edge of your comfort zone. When you feel that familiar doubt or anxiety, instead of automatically retreating, you can pause and ask yourself, what am I really afraid of here? Is this a real danger? Or is it just the fear of the unknown? Is this fence protecting me? Or is it confining me? Let's be clear, this isn't about becoming fearless. Fear is a vital, healthy emotion. The goal isn't to eliminate it, but to change your relationship with it. It's about learning to feel the fear and take a step forward anyway. It's about slowly, deliberately, pushing against that invisible fence, just to see how strong it really is. You might find that it's not a solid wall after all, but more like a curtain of mist that you can actually walk through. Every time you take a small step outside your comfort zone, you are recalibrating your internal alarm system. You're teaching your brain that the unknown doesn't always equal danger. Maybe you try a new hobby, speak up in a meeting, or travel to a place you've never been. With each step, the fence moves a little further out. Your world gets a little bigger. Your identity expands. You're no longer just the person who plays it safe. You become the person who is willing to try new things. The journey from survival to identity is a long one, coded into our very DNA. Our ancient fears are powerful, and they show up as the invisible fences in our modern lives. But they don't have to be our cages. By understanding their origin and their purpose, we can learn to see them for what they are. Echoes of the past, not definitions of our future. We can learn to honor the feeling, question the boundary, and choose to step beyond it, because the most meaningful parts of life are almost always waiting just on the other side of that invisible fence. The fifth topic is when boundaries became internal. Have you ever wondered why some things just feel wrong, even when no one's watching? Or why certain ideas seem unthinkable, almost like there's a wall inside your own head? It's a fascinating question that takes us way back to the dawn of humanity, to understand how the lines we live by moved from the outside world into the very fabric of our minds. Let's travel back in time. Imagine early humans living in small, tight-knit groups. Their world was full of very real, very external boundaries. Don't wander too far from the group. You might get lost or eaten. Don't eat that strange, colorful berry. It could be poisonous. Don't anger the bigger guy in the tribe. You could be exiled. These weren't philosophical concepts. They were hard and fast rules for survival. Break them, and the consequences were immediate and often deadly. These boundaries were physical and social walls, enforced by the environment and the community. They were clear, they were external, and everyone knew what they were. Survival depended on it. But something incredible happened over thousands of generations. These external rules started to change. They began a slow, subtle migration from the outside world into our inner world. Think about it like a path being worn into a field. At first, it's just a suggestion, a slightly easier way to walk. But after countless people walk the same route, day after day, it becomes a deep, well-defined trail. It's no longer just an option. It's the default path. Walking anywhere else feels strange, difficult, and unnatural. This is what happened with human behavior. Actions that led to survival and acceptance were repeated over and over. Actions that led to danger or social rejection were avoided. Repetition was the key. This constant repetition created a kind of mental muscle memory. Early humans stopped needing a direct threat to stay in line. The memory of the threat was enough. The thought of wandering off alone didn't just bring fear of a predator. it started to feel inherently wrong. The desire to hoard all the food for oneself wasn't just met with angry glares. It began to trigger an internal feeling of shame. The boundary was no longer just a rule from the group. It was becoming a feeling inside the individual. This was a monumental shift. The tribe's rules were becoming personal values. And this is where belonging comes in. For early humans, being part of the group was everything. It meant safety, food, and the chance to have a family. Being cast out was a death sentence. So, the desire to belong was one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. To belong, you had to fit in. You had to adopt the group's rules, its beliefs, its way of seeing the world. You didn't just follow the rules. You internalized them. You made them your own. It was a trade. A little bit of personal freedom for a whole lot of security. And over time, this trade became unconscious. People began to believe the group's boundaries were their own personal boundaries. Let's also talk about fear. Fear is an incredibly powerful teacher. The fear of pain, the fear of starvation, the fear of being alone, these are primal motivators. When an action was associated with a negative, fearful outcome, the brain learned to avoid it at all costs. But it didn't just avoid the action, it started to avoid the very thought of the action. This is a crucial step. The mental boundary wasn't just a gatekeeper for your actions. It became a filter for your thoughts. Certain ideas would be shut down before they could even fully form. It's a mental reflex, like pulling your hand away from a hot stove. You don't think about it, you just do Italiano. The internal boundary was now proactive, not just reactive. So, here's the magic trick. Over time, these boundaries shaped by survival, repetition, belonging, and fear stopped feeling external at all. They became part of the self. People didn't feel like they were being forced to stay within limits. They simply felt that these limits were the natural order of things. Actions that were once forbidden by the tribe now just felt wrong on a gut level. Thoughts that were once dangerous to express aloud were now avoided before they even became coherent. The boundary had moved from the village square right into the center of the mind. This is the moment when boundaries become permanent, almost unbreakable. Not because they are enforced by walls or laws, but because we believe in them. We become our own guards. We think we're acting with complete freedom, making our own choices. But in reality, we're often moving within a vast, invisible enclosure built by our distant ancestors. We are navigating a landscape of thought and action that was mapped out long before we were born. The walls are invisible, but they are incredibly strong, because we are the ones who maintain them. And this is the most powerful part of the whole process. The most effective boundaries are the ones we defend ourselves. When you believe a rule is your own, you'll fight for it. You'll justify it. You'll pass it on to your children. You no longer need external pressure to conform, because your own mind does the heavy lifting. Your conscience, your sense of guilt, your feeling of what is right and wrong. These are the internal police force that keeps you in line. And once a boundary becomes this deeply internalized, it stops being questioned. It just feels natural. It feels like common sense. It feels like the way things are and the way they should be. Think about some of the fundamental things you believe. Your ideas about family, about work, about what's polite and what's rude. How many of those did you consciously choose after weighing all the options? And how many just feel right? Many of these deep-seated feelings are the echoes of ancient boundaries, passed down through culture and upbringing, so deeply ingrained that we mistake them for our own unshakable truths. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's just a human thing. This process of internalization is what allowed us to build complex societies. It allowed us to cooperate on a massive scale. It created the shared values and unspoken rules that hold communities together. Without these internal boundaries, civilization, as we know it, probably wouldn't exist. We'd still be checking over our shoulders for predators and fighting over every scrap of food. But it's also worth asking ourselves, which of my boundaries are truly my own? Which limits have I chosen for myself? And which have I simply inherited? Recognizing that these invisible walls exist is the first step toward consciously examining them. It gives us the power to ask why. Why do I believe this? Does this boundary still serve me? Does it still serve my community? Or is it just an old habit? A path worn so deep that I've forgotten I could choose to walk somewhere else. The story of how boundaries became internal is the story of how we became us. It's a tale of survival, of community, and of the incredible, almost scary power of the human mind to shape its own reality. It reminds us that the strongest walls are not made of stone, but of belief. And the most important freedoms are not just about breaking external chains. but about understanding the invisible ones we carry within ourselves. Thanks so much for exploring this idea with me today. If you found this interesting, consider liking the video and subscribing for more deep dives into the human mind. Let me know in the comments what you think. Which invisible boundaries do you see in the world around you? See you in the next one.